Hey guys, it's Andy, and I wanted to share with you for our God time today from Luke chapter 7, verses 1 through 17. Now, I recognize that this is a pretty long scripture, but I love the way that these two stories go together. Now, our first story begins in verse 1 with a Roman centurion who intentionally sends a delegation to Jesus and asks him to do a miracle. In a sense, this centurion has a kind of very formal request for Jesus, and he obviously has great faith in Jesus' ability to do something for him, to heal and perform a miracle. And in fact, Jesus will eventually commend this man for having great faith. And seemingly as a result of that great faith, Jesus performs a miracle and saves the life of the centurion's servant. Now, in contrast to the first story in Luke chapter 7, in the second story, it seems as if the widow of Nain doesn't have much faith in Jesus. In fact, she doesn't formally go to get into the presence of Jesus. She inadvertently bumps into him as she and a group of mourners were headed to the cemetery to bury her son. Now, this widow, as I said, doesn't have great faith in Jesus. In fact, we know this because she doesn't even ask Jesus to perform a miracle or even pray for her. But despite her lack of faith, Jesus does perform a miracle and raises her son to life. Now, from my perspective, this is just masterful storytelling by Luke, contrasting the first story and the second story. And in a way, it would be easy for us to just say, well, the first guy, the centurion, he has great faith. He has big faith. In the second story, the widow doesn't have much faith. She has little faith, and we should have great faith instead of little faith. But I don't think that's the point Luke is trying to make, because this character that's in both of the stories is Jesus. If we look at the story of the widow of Nain and say, well, there's not much faith in this story, we're missing the fact that Jesus has great faith. He has such great faith that he believes that in verse 14, all he has to do is say, young man, I say to you, get up. And this boy who was dead will be alive. Now, I think that's an amazing amount of faith that Jesus believes he has that kind of power. Now, when I look at this passage, I feel an incredible connection to it. You see, there are moments in my life when I have faced some circumstances that were so overwhelming to me. The truth was, I had difficulty praying about the situation. It wasn't that I doubted that God could do something. It was just that I lacked the faith to believe that God would do something. And I guess my observation is that in those seasons of my life, I have a temptation to look at other people who are praying and receiving incredible answers to prayer and think a little bit jealously, wow, they're just like the centurion. They have so much faith. In fact, they're willing to go public with their faith and formally go before God and ask him to answer their prayer. But then I look at myself and I'm sometimes embarrassed even to tell people what I'm praying for, because I just almost feel paralyzed at my lack of faith. I feel resigned that nothing's going to change in my life. Now, maybe you can't relate to the kinds of feelings that I'm describing or my lack of faith, but I bet the widow in our story could relate. As she journeys to the cemetery, she wasn't expecting that God was going to do something for her, but then she encounters Jesus. And the reason I love this passage so much is that Jesus has compassion on her. She might not have had faith in Jesus, but Jesus had faith in his Father and was willing to pray for this woman. I think the application for this story is that it reminds us that even if we've run out of faith, just being in the presence of Jesus can change everything. Jesus might have marveled at the incredible faith of the centurion, and he might have observed that it seemed like this widow didn't have much faith. But you see, our level of faith isn't a necessary condition for Jesus performing a miracle. The next time you're feeling discouraged and feel like you don't have the faith to believe God for an answer to prayer, to believe God for a miracle, I hope you won't allow your lack of faith to keep you from coming into the presence of Jesus. Because as our story today demonstrates, just being in his presence can change everything.